Speaking of color, how do we feel about this? Hi, Joanna. See, I should have thought harder about the fact that I would be blocking Miss Joanna from view when I made this new setup. Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve. Happy New Year. Almost 2 years ago, I made a video essay going in depth about West Side Story where I discussed the themes of the source material and the musical itself. And I also followed that video up with another video essay where I talked more in depth about the first feature film adaptation and the way that the material addressed matters related to the police and also the character of Anybody's. Although I already posted a more broad strokes review about Steven Spielberg's adaptation, I wanted to take a moment to revisit it along with other adaptations of Romeo and Juliet in order to express my admiration for the application of color design and color theory in them. I've talked about this before here and there, both on YouTube and other social media platforms, but I figured I should just give it its own video now that there is a new film adaptation. In the original source material, William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, we are introduced to two feuding families. There is never a reason given for why these two groups hate each other as much as they do and why the feud exists. Franco Zeffirelli created one of the most accurate film adaptations of the play. In Act 1, Scene 1, two servants of the Capulet family named Samson and Gregory are out in public when they instigate a fight with Abraham, who is a servant to the Montague family. To the audience, these men don't look all that different from one another except for in one way: their clothing. The Capulet servants are dressed in these red and yellow outfits, while the Montague side tends to dress in more blue and green. One of the easiest ways to simplify certain aspects of color theory is to look at a color wheel. If colors are on the opposite sides of each other on the color wheel, they are contrasting colors. That contrast allows both of them to better pop in their own right when presented near each other. A timely example of that is the whole consumerist Christmas culture designed by American capitalists to make more money, and it's dominated by a red and green color scheme. Here in this scene, we see the red and green contrasting one another, and this general color scheme follows these two family groups to the end of Act 1, when we see Romeo and his friends sneak into the Capulet's party and he meets Juliet for the first time. We see numerous members of the Capulet family donning shades of red and orange, including Juliet herself. What is orange's contrasting color? Blue. What color is Romeo wearing? Blue. A definition of the word contrast is the state of being strikingly different from something else, so it makes perfect sense thematically to dress members of these two groups in contrasting colors. It also helps to better communicate this difference to the audience in a visual medium like film. Not that you can't apply this same principle of color theory to a live theater performance of Romeo and Juliet, but in order for me to discuss this concept here on YouTube, it works much better for me to use film adaptations as a point of reference. If we then shift to West Side Story, which, as we all know, is an adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, we have the 1961 film adaptation of the musical, and one of the key technical details I want to mention before we talk about specific color choices in this film is that this film, like much of the golden age of Hollywood musicals, was shot in Technicolor. Without going into unsolicited details about camera technology, the TLDR about Technicolor is that it made colors look more bold, vibrant, and saturated. There is a very distinct look of films that were shot using Technicolor, and to be quite honest, and at the risk of making myself sound like a boomer, I miss Technicolor. I don't think the look of Technicolor is necessarily right for every film, but it would just be nice to see that aesthetic used more often than it is. When we look at the color palette and design for West Side Story 1961, we can look at the two feuding groups, which are rival gangs, the Jets and the Sharks. When you are first introduced to the gangs, there isn't really a clear uniform to differentiate the groups, but it is easier for the audience to tell them apart because one group is white and the other group is brown-skinned Puerto Ricans. If you're watching this video, you're probably already aware that multiple actors who portrayed Puerto Rican characters in this film were painted to look more brown than they actually were in real life. I'm not condoning it, but in case this is the first video that you are watching of mine and you have not already heard me address this, I'm mentioning it again. One notable exception, of course, though, is Jose de Vega, original Chino, a Filipino-Colombian icon, a trailblazer. Exactly. You can look up other pictures of him and he just looked like that. That melanin is all natural. But if we talk about the color design of the wardrobe choice, it is interesting to note that in the film's opening, the leaders of these gangs are dressed in contrasting colors. You have Riff, the leader of the Jets, in a green jacket, and Bernardo, the leader of the Sharks, in a red shirt. If we fast forward to the dance, this is where the color design becomes much more apparent. On the side of the Jets, there is an emphasis on yellow and orange, and on the side of the Sharks, there is an emphasis on purple and red. When you take colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, they are sometimes referred to as analogous colors. Analogous means similar or comparable to something else. By dressing people on the same side of the conflict in analogous colors, you are effectively giving the audience another visual clue of them being part of the same group. Then, once again, if we hone in on the leaders of these gangs, Riff and Bernardo, they are once again dressed in contrasting colors. Bernardo is wearing purple, which is on the opposite side of the color wheel as yellow, which is the color Riff is wearing. His second in command, Ice, is also wearing yellow, by the way, as is Tony. He has the same shade of yellow as Riff, which helps to further emphasize how these two are best friends. They're like brothers. Another thing I want to talk about for this film's color design is for Maria's journey. After she meets Tony and she's all love-struck by this very pretty boy, in the I Feel Pretty number, her main dress that she's wearing is yellow and orange, the same colors as many of the Jets were wearing at the dance, while the other girls at the dress shop are still wearing the Sharks colors, which, like I said, were established at that dance as being purple and red. It adds an element of transformation and of moving more towards Tony, who is from that world even if he's not all that active in the Jets gang anymore. Maria also has her iconic dress that she wears to the dance. It's mostly white, which makes sense because white is often a color associated with outdated concepts like purity and virginity, and the dialogue enhances that idea within the story.
It is now to be a dress for dancing, no longer for praying.
But she also makes a comment playing with the idea of dyeing the dress red.
Could we not dye it red at least? Oh, no, we could not.
All of these details, the white color of the dress and the accent of red and the lines that in one way or another align with those color choices, all work in tandem to establish Maria's character and foreshadow her journey that she will go on across the story. What she ultimately experiences is a loss of innocence, not just in the archaic, puritanical sense of falling in love and engaging in fornication. Oh, the scandal of it all. But also because the deeper themes of Romeo and Juliet address the loss of innocence by way of violence between feuding groups. Whether you want to call it tribalism or chauvinism, the point is that this violence and this hate is poisonous. It corrupts and infects the people that it comes into contact with. It is a destructive force. When we get to the end of the film, Maria is now in an entirely red dress. Red as a color can work in a number of ways depending on the context. It can be about romance and passion, but it can also be the color of blood. Maria is ready to run away and start a new life with the boy she met at a dance, but he is gunned down because of this festering, destructive violence between the Jets and the Sharks. You started her off in white, and she was already on this journey to move away from innocence and purity, and now she's all in red. And it completely works. It's a perfect way of enhancing the story through color design. Now we move to the most recent adaptation, Steven Spielberg's West Side Story. I don't think I have quite as much to say because, much to my sadness, I don't think there is as much done with the color design. A lot of the things seem to be going for an almost gritty realism, which I'll admit I'm biased to favor less simply because I grew up loving Technicolor musicals. However, there were a few things that I noticed when watching the film. For one, they recreated Natalie Wood's dress for Rachel Zegler to wear at the dance. That had me very excited. I love a fashion homage, along with the choice to introduce this new Bernardo in a red shirt, just like they did with George Chakiris in 1961. There's probably also a point to be made for how these characters are siblings, and you have red in some of the earliest outfits for both of them to be established as characters. It might be a more incidental design alignment than anything, but either way, it's a nice detail that adds another thread through both of their characters. Back when the first promotional images for this film were released, one was of the Jets and Sharks at the dance, and you can clearly see how there is this distinct choice to dress the Jets in blue and the Sharks in this almost burgundy shade of red. There are real life equivalents of different gangs who wear blue and red to differentiate themselves from one another, so perhaps that might have consciously or subconsciously played into the choice to have these two groups wear those colors. But I would also note that in another musical number, America, the Puerto Rican characters, the Sharks, they're largely dressed in red, orange, and yellow. These are all warm-toned colors, and when you have this large of a group dressing in these analogous colors, it helps to invoke this imagery, aesthetic, and feeling of a warmer tropical climate, which suits the fact that these characters are all supposed to be from the island of Puerto Rico. Another thing that is interesting about this number in regards to color theory is that Anita is dressed in this vibrant yellow dress. I think it's entirely plausible that they chose this color just because Ariana DeBose looks amazing in vibrant yellow, but incidentally, yellow is a contrasting color to purple, which is the color that Rita Moreno wore for her iconic look as Anita during both the Mambo dance and the America musical number. It just happens to be this nice moment of kismet where Ariana was able to do her own thing with the character of Anita, and the color design of these two different adaptations can match that in a way. I remember Ariana saying in an interview something to the effect of how Rita had told her that she didn't need Rita's help and that she could do it, she could make the character her own, something like that. It was a really nice sentiment. And one of the other things I like about this is that if people wanted to make fan edits or fan art of both Anitas in their iconic dresses, the contrasting colors would work really well together visually because they would both pop and look good together design-wise. Switching back to the Jets, blue really is the recurring color for them in this adaptation. I already mentioned that for the gym outfits, but it's also worth noting that this film's Tony is introduced wearing the color blue. This film restores certain things that the 1961 film had deviated from, namely how Ice was an original character made for that film adaptation, and they gave him the song Cool to do, and it was moved sequentially to happen after the Rumble. It's fitting that they would give the song Cool to a man named Ice. I like that detail. Anyway, in Steven Spielberg's West Side Story, the song Cool is led by Tony, the same Tony whose introductory color is blue, a cool toned color. Then in the final dramatic conclusion of the film, when Tony gets shot and Maria was on her way, ready to run away with him, what color is her dress? Blue. Her dress is blue. Disney, don't yell at me for posting that photo. I didn't take it. I found it on Instagram. Maria was ready to start a new life with him. She was wearing his color. And then it all ended tragically because William Shakespeare wanted all of us to lament the tragedy of innocence and lives being lost because of violent tribalism, bigotry, chauvinism, whatever you want to call it. Do I think that anyone else cares besides me about these details of color design, the color stories? I have no idea. But I love details like this. Of course, to tell a great story, you need a great script or screenplay or a play and skilled performers to bring those words to life. But I also think that people should think about color. If you're a director and color isn't your forte, you really need to make sure that you stay open and encourage this type of creativity from the people who work in production design and wardrobe and all that jazz. Film is, after all, a collaborative effort. That's all I have for you for today. I hope you enjoyed my ramblings about the color design of these Romeo and Juliet and West Side Story adaptations. Stay tuned because I have a lot of plans for even more videos in 2022. I'm excited that this is the first one, and I'll see you next time. Bye.